Good morning. Today is November the 28th, the week after Thanksgiving. What a week. What a weekend, Pastor Eugene. I think there is a warm place in my heart for Thanksgiving. Could be could be heartburn. But
Day before Thanksgiving for me.
oh, for me it's the Monday, the 28th. But yeah, good morning. Today we'll be talking about Commandments 6, 7, and 8. We're continuing on our series on the Decalogue. We'll be talking about these three topics, some Q&A, and a current event that is very, very upsetting. I'm really mad about it. We'll be talking about all those things this morning on the Dear Church podcast. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang.
Your name is Sam Yang?
Yeah, wait, that's what I've been saying for like the past few years. Well, no, for the past lifetime of mine. And we have with us
Jun Suk Seo.
that is what Siri says Chunzuk's name is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we have with us, of course, the near and dear Pastor Eugene Kim. Good morning to you all. How was your Thanksgiving? What do you think your Thanksgiving was like?
What?
How was your Thanksgiving?
What's your favorite Thanksgiving food?
Definitely not turkey. Although Al Mohler had a great daily briefing podcast about turkeys, but I'm actually not a big fan of turkeys at all.
Today.
At all.
He had it today.
Yeah.
Which is the 23rd.
So yes, we're recording on the 23rd, but this is for the 28th.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do not like turkey. I do love sweet potatoes though. What is your favorite like traditional Thanksgiving food? If you had to think of the traditional Thanksgiving food.
Probably stuffing.
Ooh, stuffing is nice.
I don't get it. Like I don't get the purpose of it.
You're supposed to eat it with the turkey
But why though?
instead of French fries. Why eat French fries with your burgers then?
I guess. I don't know, because it's delicious. I don't know. But stuffing, like you never eat stuffing outside of Thanksgiving, right? You never have like a stuffing party.
You should start one.
I
Stuffing
hate stuffing
party.
as is though. I can't. Anyways, Pastor Eugene, what is your favorite traditional Thanksgiving food?
The charcuterie board.
That's not a, I don't know if they had, I don't know if the Pilgrims did that.
I'm sure they did. They probably had like,
Charcuterie?
yeah, they had like 50 cheeses, some grapes.
Grapes and figs and jams.
Had this wooden board.
I feel like you're a mac and cheese guy.
Eh.
But do you like apple pie
Yes.
with ice cream? A la mode.
No mode. Some
I feel like
pecan
we've
pie
talked
would be
about
nice.
this before.
Yeah.
We
The
have,
a la
I
mode
know,
thing.
but
Some pecan pie would be nice.
from Kirkland.
Oh, you got to freeze it.
Don't take
That's-
credit for my things.
That's my secret.
Junza, I think that's a really good idea. I should freeze pecan pie and eat it for dessert.
The true listeners of this podcast know that that's my idea. But yeah, we had a great Thanksgiving. We all of us did, I assume. Fun and games aside, we have commandments number 6, 7, and 8, and they seem pretty straightforward. But I think today, in today's context, these commandments are a little bit more complex in that they are completely relatable to today's what we've gone through actually in the past couple of years as a country. Commandment number 6 is you shall not murder. And this is again from Exodus chapter 20 verse 13. I guess the first question that I have to ask is what constitutes murder? And I think we need to answer this because people don't think that certain things are murder, which are murder. If that makes sense.
No.
So what is murder? What constitutes murder?
Yeah, in the context here, the word for murder is to kill and we know that 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 context, excuse me, refers to killing a human. Um, I think it's more explained in Exodus 21 exactly what that is. So we could look at Exodus 21. Um, yeah, 12.
Exodus 21, verse 12. Whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place to which he may flee. But if a man willfully attacks another to kill him by cunning, you shall take him from my altar that he may die.
Implication here is murder. That's why it's translated as murder. So if you take another person's life, you premeditated it, or it could be out of passion, but you purposefully take someone else's life, that's murder. And so that's what God is saying or prohibiting.
So we know that the negative commands the positive, meaning that if we're commanded not to murder, we are then commanded to promote life. How can Christians promote life? It seems kind of like a broad or a general statement to make, like, let's just love life, let's promote life. What does it mean today for a Christian to promote life, and how far are we to go in doing this?
Yeah. So not just so in the Hebrew, in the Greek Septuagint, it's just really no kill,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Or no murder. I guess you could say that. No murder, right?
Yes.
And so in the Greek translation also is no kill. And so you can't kill. Obviously, it's talking about murder in the context. Obviously, it's not about killing. Otherwise, you wouldn't have even had Exodus chapter 21. So some killing is permitted, but some killings are prohibited. So we need to know what it is. So it's not about accidental or unpremeditated killings. This is about purposeful killings. And the weight that it has is the death penalty, which we saw in Exodus chapter 21, right? So the opposite of that, obviously, would be to be a good neighbor by protecting the sanctity of life. If you can't murder somebody, that means you ought to protect their life.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I have two questions actually. First is, I guess just continuing on, how far are we to go in that regard? For example, I know that we've spoken openly about why abortion is wrong, and why that is a sin, and why that is murder, and why that is a despicable evil that opposes God. How far then are we to go in opposing abortion? Meaning, is just voting against them enough? Is Do we have to, picket and protest at abortion clinics? Do we, because there's a lot of people, and I think it there's varying degrees of responses, right? There's people that would even bomb abortion centers or attack abortion centers. There's people that would protest. There's people that would pray. There's people that would vote. There's people that would just talk about it. Like, there's a variety of responses. What is the most biblical and Christian way of promoting life, especially in this abortion arena?
Yeah, I think the first thing that we always do is speak truth. I think people want to speak their own truths, like the Oprah way, speak your truth.
Yeah.
But that is a twisting and a perversion of the biblical truth, which is we are to speak truth, and all truth is God's truth.
Yeah.
And so the first thing we would do in regard to abortion would be to speak the truth about what life is, about the sanctity of life, about the imago Dei in life. There's a difference between killing a baby and euthanizing a dog or something to that effect. And it's because the sanctity of life is just, I would say it is innate. People just know there is a difference. It's just when you continue to twist, pervert, you continue to go down this path to degeneracy. You don't know the difference between, let's say, human life and the life of a plant. You know what I mean?
Mm.
It'll go down. So now you start like bowing down and asking plants for forgiveness,
Yeah.
which is what Union Theological Seminary did, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So they held like a little worship service and put all these house plants in the middle and asked them for forgiveness. It that degeneration leads to lunacy, and so you don't know the weights of anything anymore. I think that's the path of sin. It leads you down lunacy because none of reality makes sense anymore. You don't know the weights. So imagine like you're lifting and you don't have any markers on the weights and you don't know what anything weighs. And that's how you just want to live from now on. They all look alike. I mean, there's going to be injuries. You have no idea of how to control your progress. You don't even know if you're lifting anymore because I don't know. You could swap them out for fake weights. Who knows? But if you don't know the weight of anything, if you don't know the measure of anything, then you actually live in la la land and you're dragging everybody down with you to this lunacy. So when we talk about murder and the sanctity of life, it's because God has placed value on human life. And so we are adhering to what God has placed.
I know that we have discussed this before, um, but I think just for uh, the sake of, or just because it's relevant and people may not have heard our earlier episode, murder talked about pre-planned or by cunning. Isn't warfare just the same thing? So how do Christian soldiers deal with this command?
Yeah. And so let's go from the broad to more specific. Pacifists are incorrect in their theology. So, people who don't want to do no killing or don't want to commit any kind of killing at all, we usually call them pacifists. Obviously, if you read Exodus chapter 21, pacifism is not an option because you kill the murderer, right? In fact, I would think that if you read Exodus chapter 21, you couldn't be against capital punishment either. But maybe we could save that for another time.
Mm.
But yeah, so God orders the murderer to be put to death. He doesn't order exactly what means they are put to death. So it's not like he shall be strung up or hung, or he shall be injected with a toxic chemical, he shall be electrocuted. It doesn't say that. It just
Right.
says he shall be killed. And so you kill the murderer. There's also, places where you know that you can defend your own life. If, let's say, a would-be killer would come into your home, you should be able to protect your home. You should be able to protect your family. And that's, any kind of civilization also has that. You don't need to be a Christian to understand this. And so if someone tries to infringe on your borders, you can protect your country. You can protect or defend its borders. That's not what we're doing now. We have a massive invasion of millions of people, but we're not protecting the borders. And with that, it's shown as, these poor migrants are coming in, but with it comes thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of pounds of drugs, fentanyl, and all these other drugs are coming in as well because we're not defending our border. And we're having this huge epidemic of fentanyl deaths.
Yeah.
And so that's going on. That's what happens when you don't defend your home. Like, people die. And so we want to defend our home. So yeah, war is the same thing. We use that same kind of philosophy, the just war theory we talked about, but I think it stems from that basic idea of you get to defend your home. You get to defend what is true, what is right. And if someone wants to infringe on that, you have every right by the power of the government to do that. I think that's the government's job, to protect its citizen. And so if you are employed by the government and you are commissioned by the government, you can do exactly that as well.
Gotcha. Any other comments on commandment number 6?
Jansuki does.
I have a question on the topic of suicide. How are we to view that as Christians? Is it considered murder? And I think even our neighbors up north, Canada, is doing this thing now called assisted suicide, where physicians can assist people that are deemed to be of a cognitive. I don't know.
There's just a lot of gray on this one, especially if you are trying to get the assisted suicide into place. Um, I do believe sin makes everything murky. It just clouds everything, including this. And so there are times and instances where you would think that this person is in tremendous pain and, they're on, let's say, a ventilator. But by taking the ventilator out of their body, then what you're doing is you're effectively killing them. But they wouldn't have been able to live without the ventilator, without any assistance and that kind of thing. And so families would, have the really difficult decision of taking out the ventilator. I'm sure we've heard stories like that. Assisted suicide comes into place, I think, because people want to think of themselves as these purveyors of, philanthropy. I'm doing such a good thing by helping this person kill themselves painlessly, or something to that effect. Um, it gets really gray because people who want to kill themselves are not right in the head. So you have to sign these documents. What if at the last minute they change their minds, and which these things have happened, and then they've gone and killed them anyway? You've just committed murder, like outright murder. Uh, Assisted suicide, I think, still is murder. You're still taking a human life. We're not. There to take a human life. If a person can live, then why are you killing them? If the person has some kind of cognitive decline, or some, I guess, I don't know, something is wrong with their head, let's say, and they're just not right in the head, we try to get them as much help as we can. We are in the year 2022, when we have at our disposal the best tech, the best medicines than we've ever had before, and yet we're talking about euthanasia now. I think it's because our whole society is corrupt. We've gone down this path where we don't know from our left and right. And so we're thinking, yeah, killing people is like an option now. It's just because we don't know anything. Yeah, Canada is just so far gone. I'm trying to be nice here, but Canada is just so far gone that this assisted suicide is definitely going to bring up problems. People are going to die. I hope people are going to sue, but people are going to definitely go into these places where there is no return. Taking a life is a very, very heavy, heavy thing.
Mm.
And suicide is especially heavy because you're taking your own life. It's still a life. It's still an image made in by God. It's I should say it's still made in the image of God. And so, yeah, I would say be very careful if you want to promote things like these. I would not, and I would I would err on the side of caution. But for me personally, I think, and people have come up to me with all these, hypotheticals, and I always say that's a hypothetical. I don't know the exact situation, but we have to start with the general. The general principle is that life is precious, and then we take it as such. And if you take life with the heaviness and the preciousness that God has given us, I think we would make vastly different decisions than we are making now.
Thank you for that. Moving on to the seventh commandment. This is Exodus chapter 20, verse 14. You shall not commit adultery. What is adultery? What if you're not married? Is that considered adultery? Does this also involve pornography? At what point is it considered adultery?
Commandment number 7 is you shall not commit adultery. And that is when you fornicate with someone that is not your spouse.
So would we say that premarital sex is also adultery?
I would say porneia is adultery. Yeah.
Porneia?
Yeah.
What do you mean by
sexual immorality? Someone that is not your wife or your husband if you're a woman.
So I don't want to get morbid here.
Morbid?
Yeah, like disgusting. However,
what? Those are
That's
two
not
different
what it
words.
means.
what does morbid mean again?
It means it's referring to death.
What's Morbius?
That's a
Vampire.
Marvel character.
Okay.
It's Morpheus.
Who's Morpheus?
Morpheus is from
Matrix.
Matrix.
Okay. Now that we got all the mores out, not to be morbid, but not,
That's not the word.
not to be offensive. However, there are people in the secular world, and I would hope not in the Christian world, that would say, I allow my spouse to watch pornography because I'd rather have them do that than go out and cheat on me. Um, what does sexual immorality, what is within that sexual immorality realm? What would we consider sexual immorality? And does this include pornography and even watching shows that might promote like soft porn, let's say?
Yeah, we could turn to what Christ said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 27 to 30.
Matthew chapter 5, verse 27 to 30 reads, You have heard that it was said, You shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell.
Yeah, so again, just like murder, adultery is a sin that is punishable by death. That you see here, the judgment is death. And adultery is not just physically or that one time sleeping with somebody that is not your spouse, but Jesus is saying that if you commit it in your heart, you've already committed adultery. And so that's something that we ought to watch out for. That's why I'm saying it is porneia, in a sense. It's any sexual immorality, anything outside of the confines of the biblical idea or the mandate that God has given us to marry. Anything outside of that is adultery, okay? Or is porneia.
Of which pornography would be a part of.
Absolutely. That's where the word pornography comes from. It comes from porneia, which is sexual immorality.
What if someone would say, but wouldn't you agree that looking at a woman lustfully is different than actually having sexual relations with a woman outside of marriage? That's different.
Looking at a woman lustfully. Okay, so I think you're trying to make a distinction, which Martin Luther did as well.
Oh,
He
me
said,
and Martin together.
yeah, except not together. But he said, you can't help it if birds fly over your head, but you can stop them from nesting in your hair. Okay.
I feel like I would have said something somewhat similar to that.
Okay. What does that mean then?
It means that when springtime comes and birds are in the air.
Yeah, if you're attracted to something, you can't help but to be attracted by things, but you can help it from continuing to think about
Mhm.
lustful thoughts.
Mhm.
If you're attracted to something, that's what it is, right? But you can't let it nest in your head. That's the point. So having lustful thoughts means that you've already committed to thinking about these things,
Yeah.
which is a sin. And that's what Jesus is pointing out. So if a beautiful person walks by and you're like, wow, that's really beautiful. And then you just move on. That's fine. But if you continue to think about that and you continue to have that thought nest in your head and develop, that's definitely a sin. That's why we do everything that we can not to have those things stay in your head. That's why, modesty for women has always been, just lauded, and it was seen as beautiful until modern day. Now, modesty is not lauded. Apparently, it's it's part of the patriarchal system. But and men averting their eyes was respectful for women if something did happen. But now it's like, you take a video and put it up, and I don't know. It's just always the opposite.
Yeah.
And so that's the opposite that we're going at. But yeah, I would think that we would still have to adhere to the timeless instruction of God, where he would say the things that he taught us. But yeah, Martin Luther has something. It's obviously it's not in the Bible, but it is something to help us to understand the difference between having lustful thoughts and letting that kind of control your thinking versus, some things can pop in and pop out. We are human, but we're not to dwell on those things. Okay.
Not to be vulgar, but I guess for guys, this could even be taken as the no double take policy. Right? If you see somebody, you just keep walking.
But sure, you can do that. And people have like procedures and things that they're going to make actionable
Yeah.
to make sure that they're not lusting. But you could do a single take and still lust. I mean,
Right. I mean, but it's
yeah,
kind of like the whole idea. So, I mean, it's, I think what you brought up where right now it's modesty is out the door. And so I think for people, uh, it's hard not to look at immodesty. What's the opposite of modesty?
yeah, immodesty's right.
It's hard not to look at immodesty because it's everywhere. And so what I mean is, as people that are trying to be pure, don't do the double take.
Sure. I mean, it's on both men and women.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
um, I think First Timothy 2 talks about this really well. Verse 8 and 9 and 10.
First Timothy 2, verse 8, 9, and 10 reads, I desire then that in every place that the men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. Likewise, also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, with modesty and self control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness with good works.
Yeah. So these are things that we ought to do outwardly that reflects the heart. And so it's right there for us to learn and to submit to and obey. And so I hope that we can continue to do that.
Could you address the tomfoolery that because I've already committed the deed in my mind or committed the deed with my eyes, I might as well just commit the deed?
Oh, yeah. The same thing with Romans. If there's grace, should I go on sinning more?
Yeah.
And he says, by no means. And so if you understand that you have done this sin, then you would stop it as soon as possible and repent. I mean, that's the whole point of repentance.
Yeah.
Why would you let it go on and let sin do even more destructive damage to you, your family, to your body, things like that? And so, yeah, it doesn't make any sense in that sense where if you know it's a sin, you have to stop right away
Mhm.
and then turn around.
And in a practical level, in our context, how can we better guard our purity and our holiness within our church?
I think not thinking about yourself and thinking about others, trying to help them in their walk in sanctification is always a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be harsh or mean. You want to do it in kindness and love. And then you also want to just, walk in the discipline that the church provides. And so I think that community is really important. If you don't have a church community that's helping you do this to help you, become more sanctified, then I think that's a troublesome community.
Yeah.
You better fix that in your community if you have the power to do so right away. If you're not the senior pastor, then I would talk to the senior pastor or an elder in the church. If you are an elder or a senior pastor, then, you have to change that right away so that your community is conducive to sanctification, not something that would prohibit or, even deter it.
Yeah. And I think people in the church should seek out accountability and seek out discipline.
Yeah. I mean, we could go on what accountability is. Accountability is more than just, have you done this? Have you done that? Or
Mm-hmm.
did you not do this? That kind of thing. Accountability is tied in with fellowship. And it's not just about not doing the sin, it's about growing together in Christ. So, not just about not lusting, are you loving your wife?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're not married, then are you preparing yourself well to become a good husband?
Yeah.
Because if you continue to lust, you will be a terrible husband, 100%. Because you won't be satisfied with your wife. You're busy lusting after all these other women, right? What are you going to do? And so, are you preparing well? And there are men who have been given into lust and they don't even know it, but they end up resenting their wives and they don't even know why. Because their wives don't fulfill them or they don't satisfy them. And it might not even be in that physical level or the intimate level. It could be in some other level. But let me just remind our listeners, everything is tied together.
Mm.
So your intimacy, your spiritual life, your physical body, they're all tied together. So be careful about what you give yourself into because it will affect your relationships.
I thought that's something Pastor Paul said actually last week when we were actually discussing church discipline and discussing sexual immorality. Um, Pastor Paul said something that I thought was really helpful. Is oftentimes when we think about accountability, people think that it's just kind of like this thing where you commit the sin and you feel bad about it, and so you kind of have this confession session, and you say, "Hey, I did it again," and then you go on not talking to this accountability partner for another month. Then you do it again, and you just confess again. So it becomes a confession rather than an actual way of holding each other responsible um, and accountable to pursue holiness. And so it's not, there's no steps laid out. There's no practical, this is what you should do, or here's how we can pray together. But it's more of like just, hey, I did it again just to get it off my chest. That's not accountability. That's just tomfoolery.
So what do you suggest?
So what I'm suggesting is I wanted to ask, what do you suggest for for accountability? Like how can we practically keep each other accountable without it just being some kind of sharing session where you just share your faults and your sins, but nothing gets done?
Yeah. Um, there's a lot of books out there about like lust or pornography. But I think the best books that are out there are not about pornography. It's one thing if you know about pornography and its evils, but I think the better book would be about the gospel. So, a good quote unquote accountability group would be a group that reminds each other about what the gospel is and living out the gospel in your life. So this is just me personally speaking. I get that accountability groups or partnerships really help a lot of people, but I'm not a big fan of it only because of what you mentioned. It always turns into this confession session. So I'm not a big fan of it. I am a big fan of people coming together and having true fellowship in the spirit. And so that is what? That is reminding each other about what the gospel is, pushing each other, stirring each other up to do good works and fleeing from temptation and sin. That's what it is. So if your accountability group is only fleeing from sin, I think you've missed a huge portion of what fellowship should be. And so don't get into accountability groups then, but get into groups that will really promote the gospel, will remind each other of the good news and stir the other person up to do good works that glorify God and edify the neighbor. When you do that, I think you'll be in a much stronger and better position of sanctification rather than someone who's just like, put me in jail. I don't do these things. And so I think that's better. There are times when you are to be put in jail, like when you murder, so you stop murdering, so something like that. I don't know. If you murder, then like we talked about, maybe you should be executed. Not maybe, you should be executed. But I'm just trying to give a trite example to something that we're all struggling with.
Yeah. Thank you for that. This is the eighth commandment, Exodus chapter 20, verse 15. You shall not steal. What do we mean by steal? I think when we think about stealing, we may have this idea that, you go in and you rob somebody of something, a physical item. But now everything is digital. Stealing, I think, looks different than it did even 50 years ago. I think there's more ways to steal now than there were before. So, what do we mean by steal, and how can we apply this to today?
Yeah, I think when you don't have 1, 2, and 3 down, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 become almost undefinable for people. We don't even know what stealing is because we don't even know what private property is or personal property. Stealing implies that there is personal property, unless by stealing the Bible meant state property, which obviously it didn't. Okay, obviously it doesn't mean state property. It means personal property. It means private property. That means when we are given something, it is ours to steward and it is ours to manage.
Yeah.
And someone else can't come and take it willy-nilly, right? We can give it, but that's up to us to give. Does that make sense? And so I hate it that we are a nation that is founded on personal property, and yet our tax rates are so high. We are bordering on a ton of communist policies. While we don't think we are communists, we call ourselves capitalists, right? But we're bordering on a ton of communist policies. And so those are things that I think are there because we do not know what personal property is. And now we have, I don't know, we should get a little political here, but perhaps it might help us understand. There was a lot of separations or, categorizing of groups in these past midterm elections. And one of the groups were between married and single people, between men that are married and single and women that are married and single. And almost every demographic, either slightly, but a little bit went to the Republicans, except for one demographic, which went hugely for the Democrats, and that was the single woman. I think it was like 68% of single women voted for the Democrats. That's not even close. So usually most demographics, they're like really close in the 50s, That's how it usually splits down. But when you see something where you have more than a supermajority go toward one party, there's a reason why. And if you look at Obama's campaign and now Biden's campaign, they have something like the story of Jill or something like that. And it's still on the whitehouse.gov website. It's like the story of Jill. I forget exactly what it was, the name of the girl. Maybe Chunsa can find it while I talk about it. But it's about the single mother who is able to raise her child and have a job because of all these government benefits. And so now, because of all these government benefits, they are able to live a good and decent life. And it's supposed to really tug at the heartstrings of women that are out there. Oh, because of the government, we're able to live a normal life. We don't need no man. We don't need a husband to do that kind of thing. But yeah, you do need a man. You need the government. The government's taking place of the man for protection. You're relying on the government to supply all your, complementary needs, right?
Yeah.
And so Obama started it. There was a part 2 by, the Biden admin, and the government becomes a big part of that. But, the question in relevance to this commandment is, where did it get that? Where did it get the funds to supply this single mother, perhaps, with all the welfare benefits? Where did they get that money? It's from taxes. And where did taxes come from? It's from other people. And so you take from others their personal property to provide for others what you think they need or what they think they need. And so to a certain degree, perhaps that's permissible, but to the degree that it is now, where you're taxed a third of your income and it's given to the government, it seems a little excessive. Even Joseph in Genesis only took a fifth, and that was a lot, right? At the time, it was a lot. 20% was a lot. God even only commanded 10.
And that 20% was to save up for a famine that was coming, right?
It was post-famine, or it was during the famine. And then when people would get that grain, he would say, after this, you owe me 20%.
Okay.
And so government taxes came in from there. And I don't know if he invented it, probably not, but it was definitely pronounced. It was significant enough for the Bible to record that. But in the end, we are way past 20% now, is my point. And what are we doing with all that money? Are we promulgating good, noble? Are we trying to support what is right? Or are we incentivizing what is abnormal, what is actually destroying our communities, disabling families, and things of that nature? And I think it is the latter. I think it's most clearly the latter.
So, again, if we are not to steal, then there is a positive command here. How do we promote this positive command, and what is this positive command?
You're supposed to respect other people's personal property. I think that's pretty clear. And it doesn't mean that we don't share. It doesn't mean that we don't give, or that we're not, kind or generous with our goods. I think that's an absolute must, but it is up to the person to be kind and generous. Philanthropy is about the other person giving up their goods, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that a Christian ought to do. In fact, commanded to do. You're supposed to be generous with the goods that you have. In fact, in Acts 2, we saw that everybody shared what they had with one another. Barnabas was named Barnabas because he sold everything that he had and gave it to those that were in need in the church. And so people did that out of their own free will. And when Ananias and Sapphira came and they tried to, put one over on the apostles, it was the Holy Spirit that detected it, and they were killed for that by the Holy Spirit, right? And so, Peter said, I never commanded you to give up everything. Why'd you lie about giving up everything? And so there was no command. It's pretty clear for them to give up everything they have to give to like a government, state, or community. It was still theirs to give or keep. So yeah, respect personal property. Don't take from others what's not yours.
So I think in our world and our society, the Robin Hoods of society are lauded, in the sense that, these big corporations, these big businesses are pretty much stealing from us anyway. We're just taking back what is ours. So people will use justification for illegal streaming or illegal downloads. I remember when I was younger, Kazaa was huge. LimeWire was huge. All these different things. So how would we feel about, as Christians, how should we feel about illegal online downloads, let's say, or streaming, let's say? Is that considered stealing?
If it's not yours, don't take it. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's not yours, don't take it.
I mean, I only ask this because I feel like people think that that kind of stealing is a softer version. Like, at least I'm not going into a store and stealing a Kit Kat bar, right? I'm just doing this. I'm not harming anybody, is what people could say.
You're not harming anybody by illegal streaming that you do
Yeah.
for football games?
Yeah. No, not me. No, not me personally. I'm just saying, like, in general, I feel like this is something that people would just do without even thinking twice about it, not even considering the fact that this is stealing.
I think you touch upon an interesting point that a lot of people try to do, which is if I'm not harming anybody, there's no foul, right?
Yeah.
But that's not how the Bible takes it. The Bible doesn't say you've hurt this person now. So it's not anthrocentric, meaning it's not man-centered. It's God-centric. It's theocentric, right? So if God says something, it's an absolute moral, good, then we have to do it. It's an imperative.
Yeah.
And if God prohibits it, then it's a moral imperative that we don't do it. So there is no like, oh well, it really didn't hurt anybody. We don't take it from man's point of view. We take it from what God has commanded. And so if God has commanded it or prohibited it, then we have to do as God says.
I think before that, I have a question specifically on do not steal. It seems like Commandment 7, do not commit adultery. Adultery and lust is so closely tied to one another. But this commandment, do not steal, and Commandment 10, we're jumping ahead a bit, but Commandment 10 says, you shall not covet. It seems like that's like the motive behind a lot of, acts of theft. But is there a reason that these two commandments are separated?
Oh, you think 10 and 8 are separated?
In the sense, there's like two commandments given.
No, I don't. Yeah, I think coveting and stealing are two different things. But I think it's made clear where there could be some similarities, though, like you said. But they are definitely different in where one is the taking of certain property and personal property, and then coveting is I think when we end on it, we'll get to it, but it may be one of the worst things to do for someone. Yeah, and then I'll probably get to it the next time we do it, but coveting may be far worse than what a lot of people realize. And it's worse. It's like even a bigger cover than stealing. Stealing is something very specific that you are not to do. Like murder is something very specific. And then he points to lust, or for sexual immorality. And so there's something specific that's done or not done. And coveting is a very broad cover, which makes it special in itself. But yeah, I don't think coveting and stealing are synonymous, but they are similar. They kind of reach into each other, like you said. But without getting into coveting, I would think that stealing, we should every commandment you would kind of rest on, and you would think
Mm.
about it, and you would think, yeah, I can't take something that doesn't belong to me. And so, what belongs to me would have been something that people would have asked, right? And now coveting goes all the way to, am I satisfied with the thing that is the things that belong to me, right? We can actually go back and forth with that one. Yeah, I will just get into communism real quick then. Um,
Communism.
yeah, property is personal, and then just make sure that we understand that private property is personal, and that's something that we've been given, and that we ought to freely and joyfully use for God's glory and for the benefit of our neighbor, not by the state's mandate. But communism will come in and say property is theft, and it will completely flip things backwards. If it's confusing to you, it's because, yeah, it doesn't make any sense, but that's what they'll tell you. You know, you got this because you stole from the indigenous peoples. I don't know, whatever it is, right? And in turn, we need to take it from you. So you have now rationalized theft with theft. It's the same thing with Ibram Kendi's racism. We need to be racist to be anti-racist. You need to be anti-racist, and the way we fight discrimination is with more discrimination. Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense. If it's ridiculous to you, then it's because it doesn't make any sense. Yes.
Thank you for that. And if there are any other questions from the commandments, the 8 commandments that we have covered thus far, please email us at cgsnj.org, podcast at cgsnj.org. Speaking of questions, we're going to go into a time of Q&A.
We need a beat.
What you got in the bag? What you got in the bag?
What you got in the bag?
Number 1, if you're a member at a church, Pastor Eugene, and you tithe or give offering to another church, is that wrong? And also, part B of that question, if you are not a member at the church, but you still tithe and give offerings to a different organization or a church, is that okay?
So when you give tithes and or offerings, what you're doing is you are trying to be obedient to the word of God by giving as he has commanded his people to give. And if you're in a local setting, then it would only make sense to give to that local church. I think people can take that tithe and be like, you know what, I'm going to give 50% of this to the local church and another 50% to, I don't know,
Like a mission
Ligonier. Yeah,
organization.
something like that. And to that, I would say that's that person's conscience. That's that person's, it's what they want to do with their own money, that kind of thing. I don't think that there's anything inherently sinful about that. I would think, though, however, if your church needs that money, let's say you need to pay the rent, and so you get, I don't know,
Like the church
like
rent.
$1,000.
Right.
No, let's say for your house.
Oh, okay.
You get $1,000 and you can spend it on your house to pay the rent.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can split that 50-50 and give it to another house to pay their rent.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't pay your rent. That's kind of troublesome to me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So is your house in order? You got to make sure that's there. And secondly, when you give to the church, it's not like it goes directly to the rent. We take that, or the church takes that and then divvies it up according to how they see fit. And they could technically give to the organization that you deem is worthy too.
Yeah.
And so that is a great thing that can happen collectively instead of you just personally doing it. And so I think personally speaking, I don't see anything wrong with people divvying up their offerings. However, I think what is best is you sharing certain convictions about what is good and what is right, and you move as a family. So I see the benefits of that. Yeah, and secondly, if your church can't pay rent and you're like, you know what, let me give 50% to another church while your church can't pay rent, I think you are like in danger of neglect there. You're not even paying for your
Yeah.
own rent. Something's wrong with you. And what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you, Sam?
Mhm. Oh, me. This is yeah.
And
But
so, yeah.
what if you're not a member at that church? Is it still? Are you still then? Should you still give offering to the church that you are attending that you are not a member of, or can you tithe and give offerings to different churches? I mean, I think this is a complicated question, but
First, be a member of a church,
mhm,
and then you could decide. I don't know about what that order. I think that order is messed up. So I'll
mhm,
just give you, for me personally, I actually support other agencies outside the church. Does that make sense?
yeah,
Yeah. So I take the money that I have and split it. I reserve the tithe specifically for this church and whatever extra offering I have. But there's some extra money that I do have that I'll support another agency with,
yeah.
right? I think Ligonier to be I forgot what it was.
Ministry partner.
Ministry
Ministry
partner,
partner. It's
yep.
$25 a month.
Yep.
Mad cheap, yo. It's worth.
I am. Yeah, I am the
Yeah, table
minimum
talk.
payment for that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
table time. Yeah. Anyway, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's great if you are able to do that. But like I said, if I went back and our church was barely making it, couldn't pay rent, barely could cut the checks, right? I would take that $25 in an instant and put it back to our church. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
I know that people have different convictions about where exactly the tithe itself goes.
yeah,
But I don't want to really get into that if that's okay with you. I'd rather say your conviction should be to be as generous as you can with what God has given you. And for our church, for the most part, people have been more than generous. That means they paid more than just their tithes. And that's why our church is where we are. And I think that's what Christ does kind of encourage and promote. Just like when you saw when Christ visited Zacchaeus, he gave more than he had to. And he gave like half his wealth away, that kind of thing. And that's what happens when you receive Christ in your heart. You're not like, what's the minimum? Can I barely survive by giving this much? That's not the attitude. So the reason why I don't want to get into like numbers and things like that is because the attitude isn't what is the minimum I can give and get away with. The attitude is what is the maximum I can give.
I think the confusion can also come from failure to distinguish between the local church and the universal church. So somebody could say, well, I'm tithing to the universal church in that I'm tithing to a missionary organization, or I'm tithing to this church over there, that I support. But I don't live there, but I want to support them. Um, is that okay? Because then I think there's a failure to distinguish between the universal and the local. But someone could easily say, well, isn't it all Christ Church? So can't I just do that? What's wrong with that?
Yeah. But it's the local church that puts food on your table, that pays the rent, that pays the electricity bill,
Mm.
things like that. I don't understand why you do that if
Mm.
you can't live and survive. So again, I think you need to, this is what I tell the elders, you need to build your house strong. When your house is strong, you are more able to help others.
Yeah.
If your house is weak, you can't help others. And if you are helping others while your house is weak, then it's only a matter of time until the house crumbles and then you're not able to help at all. So just basic conventional wisdom would suggest that you help your house, make sure it's strong, and in that strength, you can help others. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you are able, if you're not able, look, if you're barely making it and you can't even put food on your table, then I would say you got other problems. You might have to get your finances in order. You might have to take Pastor Paul's like finance class.
Oh yeah.
You got to do something quick.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't worry about like, oh, can I pay another organization money when my church is suffering? That doesn't make any sense to me. So I don't want to generalize too much, but in my personal encounters, people who tend to say that, I always check. Is there something wrong with their heart? Meaning, are they upset at the church about something? Are they dissatisfied, malcontent?
Mhm.
Is there something there? Because usually people, this is in our sinful heart. I'm not saying they're doing a right thing. People, they would say, I'm gonna, you know, cut less of a check because, this is my repudiation of how the church is run or whatever
Yeah,
it is, right?
right.
That's a sinful heart. Yeah. And so we don't want to encourage any of that kind of attitude or behavior. I think working closely with the elders and deacons are something that I would encourage any church member to do. You have access to any of our leaders, including myself, when you're a member of our church. So I don't see what the problem would be, to be honest.
Moving on to the next question. Our church specifically, we do on Sundays, we do a lot of reading out loud together. For the newcomer, or someone that's not used to it, or someone I guess that may not be so in tune with church history, could think, isn't this kind of cultish? Seems a little cultish. How would you respond to that?
Yes.
It is.
Yes. What do you mean by cultish? But yeah, I mean,
I guess,
What do you mean
and the
by
reason why
cultish?
I'm also saying this too, I think, is because oftentimes people have an idea of what church should be growing up, and because of that, all of a sudden, when things change, when things are different, or when they have an idea of what a cult would sound like, like people reciting things all together and all this other stuff, they might think, well, whoa, isn't this
It's a
this
confessional. So we are a
right?
confessional church. People that haven't visited us for like 10 years and they come, they are surprised. It's almost like a culture shock when they come in. And I talk to them after. It's like, it felt different, right? They're like vastly different.
Hmm.
And it's really because of the confessional parts. And so when we say our creeds out loud, when
Yeah.
we say the Lord's Prayer out loud, when we sing songs focused on singing and not just spectating, we recognize that this is what the church has done throughout history because this is what is regulative, right? This is what God wants us to do. And so that's exactly what we do. And that's what we want to continue to promote. I think in just one generation, we've lost that because I don't know, we call it different kinds of worship, but it's like contemporary worship, open worship, whatever it is. And we decided to change that to try to appeal to the younger crowd. And so our focus went from doing what God wants us to do, making it God centric, to what might appeal to humans or might appeal to the new generation. So the main concern that I heard all the time growing up was, the adults would say, we have to do something to keep our young generation in church. Yeah, that's called preaching the gospel. Like that's what has happened throughout the 2 millennia. People preached the gospel and then people became believers. The Holy Spirit convicted hearts and changed hearts, transformed hearts. And now we're thinking, yeah, if we have music like Coldplay or U2, they'll come to church.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, the music's really
Yeah.
vibing. I'm vibing here. It's really chill. I love it. Yeah, they'll come, but they're not Christian. I mean, I think that's the worst thing. When people come, they think they're Christian and they're not. You give them communion. I think we went to this one open service. Was it Hillsong? I forget what it was exactly. It was in the city somewhere. And they just passed out sealed plastic bags
Oh,
of
yeah.
the communion elements,
I
right?
heard about that.
I was in the stands and there wasn't enough. So I couldn't get any. I didn't get any. Now I look back, I'm like, wow, that was by the grace of God. I didn't take quote unquote communion at that time from a sealed plastic bag. But those are things that I continually think about. And when people think, is this cultish? Perhaps they don't know what a cult is. You should join a cult and then come back and see. Tell me what you believe now, what cultish means. Is it reciting things in one voice? I mean, people do that all the time. Don't
Everywhere.
they? Didn't
Pledge of
BLM
allegiance.
make sure that everybody recites, I am a white supremacist and I repent
Yeah.
of my whiteness? Everything has a creed.
Mm.
Whether you're a Christian or not, whether you're part of a cult like BLM or you're part of the true Orthodox Church, everything has a creed. It's not about whether you have a creed or not. It's about what is the creed.
Regards to communion, why does CGS take communion so often? Isn't it Roman Catholic tradition to take it so often? So, to my understanding, I know the Roman Catholics take it every mass.
Yeah. They
Um,
take it every single time, and we do not. So I think the right criticism would be, why don't we take it more often? Why do we only do it once a month? So in our church, if you don't know, we only take it once a month. So I think the correct criticism of that would be, why don't you take it more often as you should? And I think that's a good thing. I think we are changing, but maybe not fast enough. But communion should be administered when the people of God come together. And that's what it is. I don't know where we got this idea that we could do it once every 2 months
or twice a year.
or twice a year or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But that's not how the church functions or has functioned. And so we're trying to get back. It has a lot to do with logistics and what we can prepare and what we could get ready. But I do believe once a month then would be minimal. In my personal opinion, once a month is minimum. I think we should do it more often. And sometimes we do it a lot. Like at the end of the year, what do we do? Like 4 times? Something like that in
because of
December.
Christmas, New Year's Day,
Yeah.
right?
And then New Year's Eve, we take it.
And that depends on which first Sunday is which date.
Yeah.
Right.
So
So,
take it on Christmas.
oh, we don't?
We take it on Easter.
Oh, we take
Good
it on Easter,
Friday.
not Christmas.
Yeah.
So continuing on with the topic of communion, knowing the seriousness of communion and how we ought to take it, is it then wrong to partake of the Lord's Supper in churches that administer it not according to the word, or perhaps that administer it in churches that are not Bible believing? Let's say.
I think we come across dangerous territory when it needs to be perfect according to what standard, right? And so you rightly pointed out that it should be the biblical standard. And I think there's some broad standards that we can apply. Meaning if it's not a Jesus believing church or it's a heretical church, I wouldn't take communion there. Like if I went to a Bethel gathering, I would not take communion there. Like I'm just going to be 100 with you here. If I went to a church that I know does not believe the Bible to be true, I would not take communion there. If someone administered it, meaning the minister that was administering the sacraments was not a Bible believing Christian or, claiming to be Christian, I would not take communion from that person.
Yeah.
If a woman administered communion, I would not take communion from that person. So there are general broad things that I would take very seriously about communion. Which is one of the reasons why we stopped doing this church thing, or I stopped bringing our church to like larger gatherings where those theological differences aren't defined. And so people just willy-nilly give out communion. There's no fencing at all. There's no testing of who's administering. So I don't think it's very healthy, and it's a bad teacher. You're not teaching rightly then. And so, I would take those broad things. But if you're like, well, I really don't like how the pastor dresses, because honestly, the pastor could dress in a full suit, or he might dress in a partial suit, or he might actually just dress in a regular shirt and, pants. I don't know, whatever it is. And then you're like, well, I need him to dress in a full suit. Otherwise, I feel uncomfortable taking communion. I think that's weird. So I would say general biblical principles you would take. If they are flagrantly going against what the Bible clearly says, then I would not take it from them. But it can get kind of dicey. Yeah, that's why I would say, why are you taking communion in other places? Take it in your local church. Okay, and why are other places giving communion? I'm not sure why that's the case, right? Why are they administering communion at like a conference or something? That's not a church service. Yeah. That's not the gathering of the saints. There's no testing. So why are they doing that there? You shouldn't. All right. So don't go to conferences that administer communion. That's weird.
Speaking of weird, we're going to go into our current events. last week, Balenciaga, the luxury brand.
Yesterday.
Well, I mean, it's yesterday for us, but last week for the listeners. They Balenciaga released ad pictures for their 2023 spring campaign featuring children holding teddy bear bags dressed in bondage, aka kink gear. It was very sexualized. Not only that, as if that wasn't enough, in another image of the same campaign, there was a snippet from a 2008 U.S. Supreme Court case that upheld federal statutes on pornography that include minors. This court case was the United States versus Williams case, which criminalized the pandering of child pornography. This is obviously not a random document that they left hiding in plain sight, especially in a campaign featuring children with teddy bear bags that are dressed in kink. There is meaning behind this, and this was intentional. What are your thoughts on what's happening over at Balenciaga?
What are your thoughts? I heard you like raving
No,
almost
I wasn't
from the
raving.
other room. Okay.
It's just disgusting.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was
and
very angry researching
no,
this.
it wasn't. It's just like
You weren't angry, Junso?
no, I
I was
wasn't.
very angry.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's just I don't have words for
Yeah.
stuff like this. It's just I don't like what because first of all, the fact that these children, and I guess if our listeners are looking at the photos, the fact that these children are holding these teddy bears and these teddy bears are dressed in kink attire, that makes no sense. That's very intentional. That's very purposeful. And the fact that they left this hidden 2008 court case document hidden in plain sight, I mean, that's obviously purposeful as well. And they placed it. So it's just the messaging is, and you might not even think it's a big deal, but it's like, I don't know how this could be a mistake, or I don't know how this could ever not have any intention or purpose. Like, yeah, and then the photographer came out saying, oh, I had nothing to do with this. I'm just there to take photos. But then Chunsuk found there was a tweet where what did he say, Chunsuk?
He had a old ad campaign for like anti-gun
Yeah,
ad campaign
yeah.
where the comment on his tweet was, "You want to ban child pornography and not guns."
I saw his previous work. It's very similar to what we saw in the Balenciaga ads. They took down the ads and they issued an Instagram apology. Obviously, people like us will not think that is enough. I think it's the deterioration of our country, our morals, our values. Our children are the most vulnerable from the womb to young toddlers, and they are being exploited. They are being sexualized. They are being taken advantage of. And that's why we are so upset, because I think righteous people know this is true abhorrent evil.
Yeah.
And that we should be outraged. Balenciaga is not any brand that I guess you and I would ever buy. It's a very, very high retail brand. But at the same time, those ads are there for public consumption. Just like,
Mhm.
You and I might not be able to afford a Lambo. But at the same time, when Lamborghini or Porsche or whatever, they produce an ad, it's for us to be like, wow, that's pretty awesome, that kind of thing. It's
Yeah,
for
yeah.
the regular public consumption. So they're, in that sense, the luxury brands kind of lead the way, and other
Yeah.
brands kind of follow in their footsteps. So Balenciaga doing this is, I don't think there's any doubt in anybody's mind that this was done on purpose, and this wasn't just willfully done by the photographer. There were many people that saw these photos and approved it, or they were
Yeah.
part of. There is no. Okay, first of all, there's no photo in an ad that comes out that is not approved at multiple different levels in an advertising company. This is a fact. You just don't post a photo and then, like, a photographer doesn't take a photo and all of a sudden it's in an ad.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it gets cured, it gets edited, it goes through a ton of different levels of
Yeah.
supervision, and then the words are added. Editors come and take a look at it. All of this was done, and it was curated so that we can see what we saw, which was pure evil. And so I think speaking out on it is great. I think expressing our disgust and anger on it is proper and is good. This is, I would think, is righteous anger, especially when we're angry for those poor kids that have been exploited to this degree. I mean, where were the parents? What did they say about this? And, you know, we have laws in this country. If a child is abused, we take them away from that abusive environment. This is clear abuse. So what's gonna happen to those children? I think those are just the normal questions that should be asked, and Valencia should, I don't know, somehow pay the penalty according to our laws. But at the same time, I think they should burn. Like that place should just come toppling down. What they did was just utterly despicable. I mean, we're recording this on a Wednesday before Thanksgiving, so who knows what's going to transpire until this gets released on Monday. But I hope they are held responsible for what they did. There's no way that people in the higher ups did not know about what was going on. And they did this, I think, and I could be wrong, but this is now my personal take. Everything else that I said before is fact, okay? My personal take is they did this on purpose. And so heads need to roll. That's what it is. People need to be fired. We can't have this kind of sexual exploitation of children. It's not even minors. It's all the way down to toddlers, right? So that just makes it even more abhorrent. People need to be held accountable and responsible.
And it's very upsetting that for Balenciaga, they're saying that it wasn't their fault.
I think both parties are just
Yeah.
trying to shift blame.
But
Like,
photographer's
They're trying
saying it's
to
not his fault.
distance themselves.
Well, whose fault is it then?
Right.
And
But if they
yeah.
think that if they distance themselves, maybe the story will go away.
Yeah, I think it's just also upsetting that they thought that it was okay, that the society and the culture would be even somewhat accepting of this. Kind of shows you how even the secular world views our society, and just kind of the wheels that they're trying to turn to make our society go towards a certain place.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps they're testing the waters, but I do think it was a blatant disregard. Um, it's in the Psalms where people would laugh. They laugh. What does it say in Proverbs? The fool laughs. But in the end, God gets the last laugh.
Mm.
And so be careful when you're laughing. You might be a fool. Balenciaga.
It is World Cup week. There's a lot of things happening in the World Cup, which we'll talk about next week, actually.
that's the topic.
What is?
World Cup.
No. That's the current event. There's a lot of crazy things happening with the World Cup this year.
Oh, yeah? Like what?
This is going into it, but I mean, the U.S. men's national team, all of their practice facilities, I believe, their U.S. logo has the rainbow flag on it. Being gay is illegal in Qatar. I think you can be held up to 7 years in prison.
Isn't that interesting though? Like this whole Balenciaga and the World Cup stuff is happening in tandem. And I think I heard like the Young Turks guy. What is his name?
What's Young Turks?
The guy main guy. What is his name
I
again?
forgot his
It's
name.
like
Yeah.
I forgot what it was. Like
Cenk.
yeah,
Is it Cenk
yeah, that's his name.
Uyghur?
Yeah,
Or is it Senk?
no, it's Cenk
Cenk Uyghur?
or Sank. I forget.
And Ben Mankiewicz?
No. He went on a tirade about how these Republicans are going nuts over child pornography or something like that because they're probably all pedophiles. So if you're angry, so it's a great commentary. If you are, according to this guy, if you are angry at the the exploitation of children, is probably because you're a pedophile. It doesn't make any sense, obviously. That's like saying if you're angry at murder, you're a murderer. But they are doing whatever they can, because I do believe if you are for LGBTQ, then maps are just, an inevitable conclusion. It's like Thanos. It's inevitable. But yeah, like the things that we're seeing in LGBTQ are just tied together.
When most like major news networks right now that hold to a leftist ideology, they're not covering the story.
No, they wouldn't. Yeah, it's a huge story, but they don't cover it. It's very unfortunate.
Yeah, so that was my angry tirade for this week. Anywho, we thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week as we continue to talk about the 10 Commandments, the 9th and the 10th. Tune in next week to find out. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith.
Peace.
What is adultery? What if you're not married? Is that considered an adult?